on Mike Stevenson, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Richard, I'm gonna bring us live on YouTube, and then we can just give it a moment, see if the other two members join us.
Sure, that's fine. Yep.
So Allison, is Allison planning to attend?
I haven't heard otherwise.
Yeah, that's right. Allison's not here either. Yep.
I'm going to shoot him an email.
Oh, Allison has just joined, so she's on.
Oh, there she is. Okay.
So let's get started, and we can hopefully Mr. Stevenson will join us.
Okay. Well, see, Allison, you weren't here a moment ago, but Nick is not going to join us tonight. So
Okay.
I'm going to step in and go through the motions of chairing this committee this evening. Let's see, we'll call to order, roll call. Tody, you want to do that?
Sure. Annalee Rosenblatt,
Here.
Karen Shu,
Here.
Mary Starr,
Here.
Allison Bristol,
Here.
Mike Wood,
Here.
Richard Siltman,
Here.
and we have both council liaisons, Jean Marie Caterina and Betsy Glycine, and Leanne Casalonis from the Board of Education, as well as Tom Hall, the town manager, Liam Gallagher, the assistant town manager, and myself.
Thank you very much, Tody. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. Did everybody have a chance to take a look at those?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Jean Marie.
I know I'm not one of the members of the committee per se, but, and I was just looking for the minutes. I apologize. I don't have them in front of me. I believe it said that I was present, but I was not. I was not able to make the last meeting. So, but I may be dreaming that, Annalee. So,
I think the minute that your presence was felt.
It says that. I'll
yeah,
correct
well,
that.
I
Thank
saw, I
you.
saw what you guys came up with and I'm like, oh boy, I better get back there. No, just kidding.
Thank you. I got that correction.
With that correction, can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Mike, second.
So can I second them since I did them? Nobody else
Sure.
is. Okay, I will.
Okay. Is there any further discussion about the minutes? Okay. Well, let's go down through the list. Let's see. Karen,
Yes.
Mary,
I was not there, so I can't approve them.
Allison,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Annalee,
Yes.
and Rich, myself, yes. So I think I got everybody. The next item on the agenda is public comments. I don't know, Liam, is there anybody here from the public?
We have no one in attendance from the public.
Okay. So we'll move along then to item 5, which is really the remaining item, I believe, on our walkthrough of the charter. It's Article 9, Section 907. And I believe we got a little bit of the way through that. We got through the issue of the 400,000. I believe we raised that to 600,000, and that was approved. And then we also adjusted that same paragraph to include in any one year, so that we dealt with this issue or any one item with the multiple year issues. So that was taken care of. So I believe that we're now on 907.1.1. And
Actually, Richard,
Yes.
I did want to raise another issue or question in 907.1. And Liam, it may be easiest if you could just pull up the text.
Is that plain just one? Yeah, okay.
Yes. So if you look at the second line of that paragraph, effectively, by my reading and the town attorney's reading, more importantly, when it says or the appropriation, so it begins by talking about the issuance of basically borrowing money. So issuance of general obligation securities. It goes on to say, or the appropriation and expenditure of funds derived solely from municipal revenue sources or a combination of both. So essentially that means effectively that any project now more than $600,000, regardless of funding source, requires voter approval. And I'll give you an example. If the town has a reserve fund that we've created for a particular purpose, let's say purchasing a fire truck, through whatever means, whether we've saved over time or we've had proceeds of who knows, that still would require voter approval. And that seems antithetical with the form of government we have. The council has the authority to approve a municipal budget of untold sums, but is limited hereby with this provision in terms of capital amounts. And I guess
Do you know whether, Tom, over the last few years, the council has been true to this language as you just interpreted it?
we've not, frankly. During my tenure, historically, it's been the issuance of the indebtedness piece that triggers that has been the conventional understanding. But upon further review of that language, I believe it does apply regardless of the funding source, borrowing, reserves, grant monies. Another example would be we collect impact fees from the development community to offset traffic impacts. Those are funds not raised through taxation. Arguably, not arguably, but I would suggest that under this provision, expenditure of those funds above that threshold would require voter approval. That just seems to be terribly cumbersome, and I say that selfishly, but I also think it seems out of place.
Would you interpret municipal revenue sources as being things like impact fees?
It's up to you. It's very broad. I think it should be liberally construed to mean, it's not specific, and therefore I would be hard pressed to say that it would not include all sources. And Annalee may recall this. I believe this was a provision added in back in 2000.
Yes, that's correct. And so it's kind of does my heart well to hear you say that, because that's how I thought we always wrote it and felt that it wasn't adhered to strictly by the town. So it's nice to see that the legal help we had back then wrote it the way it was intended. So that was, but yeah, that was the intent.
Yeah, and I can say honestly, well, I'll say it for myself. I think we were misreading it for some time and really focused on the indebtedness piece being the trigger. And that makes perfect sense to me. I think the borrowing of money is a different an issue of greater magnitude and importance. And I think that should be subject to voter approval. But other revenue sources or all other municipal revenue sources seems overly broad to me.
I see, Allison, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I had questions for Tom. Is with using your example of a fire truck, would that be something that might be in, say, a 5-year capital plan? Some kind of long-range plan?
Certainly.
Yeah, and then if there are some operating expense, I'm going to call them operating expenses. It may be a misnomer, but I'm going to use, I think as an example, when we did the reval, and I know it was split out over a couple of years, and I think that was before my time when it went to referendum, I understand, like years ago when it was defeated.
Turn off the water.
So would that be an operating expense?
It could be. I mean, that would be the workaround. If the expenditure is in the operating budget, it doesn't trigger this threshold. This threshold is limited to capital expenditures.
Okay. Well,
So, again-
what I was gonna suggest is if we put in the qualification that it's anything outside of a capital plan, you know, that, and I don't know who signs off on that, if it's the town council or whoever. And again, this may not be appropriate here, but, or anything that, you know, beyond an emergency need like we've had this year,
Right.
that's not planned in the operating budget. If it's over the $600,000 threshold, then hopefully that would give you a little more latitude.
Well, the capital budget is approved by council as part of the budget, annual budget process and approval. I think there are there are many reasons for having a separate capital budget from your general fund budget, not the least of which capital items are typically, one-time expenditures, and so they will change year to year. And so it's very hard for kind of year-over-year comparisons if you include capital items in your operating budget. So, but Allison, you help, I guess, make my point that if the council can raise millions of dollars if they wished through the general fund budget, it does not require voter approval. Yet, because of the distinction as a capital item, it does.
Right.
Mike, you had a question? You had your hand up?
Yeah, I'm trying to lower it. I wonder if maybe I'm just not seeing the potential complexity of this, but Section 907 talks about bond issues. And it seems to me that this part of 907.1, it does not completely keep itself within that title, that subject matter.
Correct. And I think that's why we've misunderstood this, that the title refers specifically to bond issues, indebtedness. But the
So,
language expands beyond that.
right. So maybe we might want to extract out the language that is not related to bond issues, and maybe make a suggestion that the town council find another place for that. I don't know.
Betsy, you have your hand up too?
Yeah, I do. I've recently had something come forward from a resident that is somewhat related to this, but I don't want to take us down a rabbit trail. But I just did want to get it out there because I think it's a concept that is kind of being touched on here, and that is the town, was considering. The town has long considered a community center and, bonding for a community center. And over the years, the referendum has been defeated. And more recently, the town was contemplating signing a lease for a community center, like kind of a sports complex, but a community center. And there was, and it was a pretty large lease. It was in the tens of millions. And it was for 30 years, I believe was a term, maybe 50. I don't remember now off the top of my head, so I apologize for that. But it was sort of something that normally you would bond, and the voters would take it to referendum. And in this case, there was an opportunity to do something different from that with an investment partner in town. And so there was concern that this language would not, or perhaps it would, allow the voters to vote on that referendum, kind of in the same spirit of any community center that the town would be able to consider. So I'm not proposing any language here, but I think thinking about the intent of this, is obligations that obligate the town for the long term, in the bond issue, or in the case of a long-term lease, that voters would probably like to have a say in that, and make sure that the town, has the flexibility to enter into different styles of agreements that maybe weren't thought about the last time this was written. So if the town finds it advantageous to do a lease rather than a bond issue, we wouldn't want to stop the town from that. But I think that kind of the spirit of this is that the people that put it in, wanted the voters to have a say on, large amounts of money over long terms. So I may be reading too much into it, but as we consider this, I wanted to put that out there.
Thanks, Betsy. Jean Marie, you also have your hand up.
Yeah, having been on the council for a few years, it's interesting. I had never noticed this in the charter before either. And I certainly think that it would be appropriate to take this out potentially. Just from as a business person, if I've got money in the bank that I don't have to borrow and I can use, sometimes it's more advantageous to do that. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's cheaper to borrow, frankly. But I just think that why would we tie the hands of the council if in fact an impact fees, that's a great example, impact fees or as Tom, as you said, purchase a fire truck, whatever. I don't see the sense of this at all. This is meant for bonds. This is for bonding, indebtedness of the town. So that's just my opinion.
I think going back to what Betsy said, I mean, I think it is definitely intended for that. But, in the private sector, if you enter into long-term leases, those are treated as balance sheet items, not operating costs. And I think my guess is that the language here was designed to include leases in lieu of a bond. But again, I could be wrong, but that's how I would have read this. And it would be easy to circumvent bonding by just leasing everything if you ever needed to do that. Tom, you have your hand up, I see.
Yeah, no, I was just going to agree with Councilor Gleising's point. To me, the legislative intent of this section is really the future obligation commitment. And I think the lease scenario certainly does set up a future obligation as well. So, if that's the intent of this, perhaps, that scenario, though it never came to pass, might also be contemplated here. But again, my hang up is the other municipal revenue sources.
You wouldn't read that, Tom, as being modified by capital?
I believe it is. This is limited to capital, yes.
Yeah.
And that's what seems illogical to me, that the council could raise millions of dollars in the operating budget on the back of taxpayers to do a project and thereby not require voter approval because it's not capital.
But I mean, if it wanted to do that in the capital budget, let's say you want, you instead of going out to bond for a $2 million fire truck, you raise property taxes by 2% or 3% and then just paid for it. You wouldn't need voter approval in that instance. But under this language, it suggests you would need voter approval. So it's almost designed to cover that circumstance where you're spending money on some capital item.
Fair enough, you're correct. It says, or the appropriation and expenditure. Yeah.
But I can see other situations like impact fees and so on, where you're putting in, street lights and curbings and all of those things as a capital investments, and you can't hold those subject to referendum. That wouldn't be appropriate. Jean Marie, you have your hand up again, I think, or did you not put it down?
No, it's back up. I'm just wondering, it is interesting what Councilor Gleising said about long-term leases, because I would consider that a form of longer-term indebtedness. And I'm looking at Tom, is there some sort of language that could cover that sort of a thing? But yet we can remove some of this to give the council more leeway in making investments that they've set money aside for without having it to go out to vote. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I think the title could be changed to be broader and to talk about long-term obligations. And then I think you could add language that talks about the issuance of general obligation securities or long-term lease obligations, something like that. Or I think there's a way to certainly capture that scenario.
Annalee, you have your hand up?
I just have a question. So I think you kind of touched on it, Tom. I learned from some other towns when they want to buy a fire engine, they do like you suggested. They put so much in the budget every year till they've raised it, and then they pay cash for their fire engine as opposed to like we did, bonding it. So once the town does that, are they obligated to spend it for what they put it away for, or can they change their mind and say, well, we're going to do something else with it? What's the restrictions on putting a budget together that way?
Yeah, I mean, the legislative body, the council would create the reserve fund that we would pay into, if you will. Those reserve funds do have clear instructions, but of course, a future council could always change those limitations. So, so theoretically, it's possible it could be used for another purpose. I don't think that that's likely to happen. I think there had to be a very good reason for it, it would seem to me. But even in that scenario, this language requires when that money is appropriated, even though it sits in the bank, it requires the voters to approve it.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly not gonna, that's not workable. And in fact, you haven't been doing that for all, the years since this was passed. So the question is, how do we proceed? Do we try to write an amendment to this on the fly, or should we send it off to a little subcommittee to work on over the next couple of weeks and try to use the sense that this is designed to include both bond issues, long-term lease commitments, and anything else that might be like that we set up?
Yeah, I think that might be a best solution, as opposed to take time with the full committee. There could be a group that could think further about it and report back with some proposed language.
So Rich, since that's your idea, do you want to just submit it to our committee, the one you're on?
Well, it would be the two of us. I'm happy to do that, Annalee. Annalee and I can do it. Tom, we want your input into this as well.
Yeah, we would need Tom's help on that wording.
Yeah, Mike Wood, your committee actually had Article 9. That's an option too.
Mike, would you like to join us?
So what did they say about that?
This is reserved out, so it was kept for the full committee.
Yeah, we took the strategic position of letting the whole group talk about this.
Oh, okay.
Well, I think the group chose to hold it back from subcommittee work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think this committee could be in a good position, if comfortable tonight, to remove that problematic language, and then to convene either a subcommittee, a new subcommittee, or the committee of Karen, Mary, and myself to do some research with the help of staff and come up with a new section, if you will, that covers this.
Do I take that as you're volunteering to do this, Mike?
Well, I should ask
Your
Karen.
committee,
Is Karen and Mary okay with that?
They're smiling.
Yeah, I guess, I think that would be fine. I definitely would want probably Tom's, feedback on that, because this isn't something that I feel like I'm, as well versed as, as other stuff. There's other committee members that feel like they have more of a background with this, I'd be open to that too. So, and Mike, I know you were on the council, I was on the school board, so this is something isn't something that I dealt with as much, but Mike, if you feel like, I know you were on it a long time, so I'm fine with helping out with it, so.
Well, it's been a long time, and certainly I wouldn't feel comfortable without the advice of some town staff and maybe legal counsel.
Allison, you put your hand up?
Yeah, another question for Tom, and we really haven't talked about it, but would a CEA be considered a future obligation?
Oh, one could argue. That starts to get really challenging. You're dealing with a private entity. Introducing public votes can be really challenging in that regard. But excellent point. I think it could be argued that that is a long-term obligation.
Would you explain that a little bit more for me? Why you would say that?
Well, a credit enhancement agreement is a legal document whereby you agree to pay a sum into the future.
I see. Okay.
The source of revenue is uniquely different. It's derived from the development that occurs within that area. So it's not totally analogous, but Allison, it's an excellent point. I think we've got to be careful so as not to include that, in my opinion, but others may wish to. So that's a scenario worth considering further.
Leanne?
Tom, just to ask a question on the CEA piece, could that put us in a position of bargaining in bad faith because we'd go through this entire process and then maybe not be able to execute because it had to go to the voters? Would that?
I don't think so. I think there's a way to carve that out and say, you know, whatever the town agrees to is subject to voter approval. So there's a way to do that, but it terribly complicates a business transaction that is very detailed and complicated. So I worry about our ability to properly educate the voters to make an informed decision on what could be a really important matter.
I would agree. It just seems like it adds a whole new level of convolution and complexity to something that's already super complex.
Let's see.
Yeah, it's a good, lots of good points being brought up. You know, I would just think, you know, as we look at this and as well as the subcommittee looks at it and the full committee, there may not be one number here, one threshold. 600,000 may apply to something, but then, you know, a lease might be a much larger number or something like that. A CEA, you know, if people want to include that, might be something much larger to consider. So I would think it would take a little bit of work to figure out what some of those thresholds might be, that it might make sense to have the voters weigh in on the long-term obligations. It might not be the same number for all the scenarios.
I mean, I don't think we need a vote to assign this to the committee, just send it back to the committee. Unless anybody has any strong objections to that. Mike and Mary and Karen, this one's all yours. You've heard the general sense of the concerns about leases, CEAs, operating expenses. And maybe what you can do is, in addition to removing the language that should be taken out, restructure it so that it would cover the kinds of things that we've been talking about this evening.
Yeah, I'd be happy to put my group together with the aid of some town staff and work on this issue. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tom, thanks for bringing that up. That snuck by all of us as we were reading it, apparently. So the next item, or going down the list of 907, is 907.1.1. I'm not completely sure, Leanne, what you were concerned about in your comments about including language to accommodate repairs and replacements of heating and water systems.
And I don't have the actual language right in front of me, but there is a piece in there that talks about we can bypass voter approval at the $400,000 in the event of natural occurrences. So if we had a flood, if we had a storm and it took down a building, but it didn't have anything in there about a heating system or a cooling system or the water mains breaking. And I didn't know if we needed to put that in there, because if a heating system goes down in January, the building is rendered useless. So I really wanted to know if we should be expanding that a bit. Thank you, Liam. That's exactly the language.
Well, I mean, people may have, can take a quick look at it, but as I read it, given your comments, you can do construction improvements and equipment needed as a result of any declared emergency. So it doesn't limit you. As soon as the council declares an emergency, you can then do whatever construction you need to do for improvements to either buildings or equipment. And that's how I read that, but I could be wrong in my reading of it. Does anybody have any other different opinion about that?
Well, if I may, Richard, I would agree with your interpretation of that. I think the reading of this does allow council to declare an emergency for a number of different reasons, and I think it should certainly cover scenarios such as what was just described. So.
Okay, I just read it very literally, not liberally. So I just wanted to make sure we were covered just in case.
I think so, Leanne. I think the language says or other declared emergency, and in this context, the council is able, must articulate and is able to declare the emergency. So it's not a FEMA federal declaration or state, or I actually have the authority of declaring an official emergency disaster. But in this case, the council could define what constitutes an emergency. And I believe the language goes so far as to say that declaration of such emergency shall be conclusive. So their word is final.
Okay. In that case, I'm good.
Okay, thanks, Liam. The next item that we have some question about is 907.1.3. Mike, Wood, you had noted that that was confusing. Did anybody else have any concerns about it? Or Mike, maybe you could let us know what you found confusing about it.
Let's see, what did I put here? Well, maybe, did we fix, I have a note here that says not 905.11 should be 905.1.1. We talked about that already, right?
Yes. Mhm.
In the event that the total number of votes cast and against the question referred order or resolved should be less than 25% of the number of votes cast. Well, actually, it's less confusing now for me because of that discussion that we had. Maybe it was our last meeting, the meeting before, when we talked about the percentages.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm comfortable with it now.
Annalee, you have a question?
Well, I have a note that we clerically said that 905.1 should read 907.1. Wasn't that a clerical correction we made both in 1.2 and in 1.3? I just wanted to make sure you got that for the redlining. But I saw Liam shake his head. So you'd got that for the redlining?
I think Tony has captured it, and Tony's taking the lead on that. If she hasn't, we will.
Okay.
Yes, I did.
You have that good. Thanks. Just wanted to point that.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that point. Any reference to 905 just doesn't make sense in this context. So it must be a Scrivener's error and should be 907 in all cases.
Yeah, that's what's really odd about it is that in the draft that I have, which I took down off the website, it's 907. So I'm not sure how the two are going around, but there's some confusion there. The next item was 907.1.4. And it looks like some of the issues that we just talked about on the issue about referendum and CEA and dollar amounts, we've covered. But Allison, you would raise this. Or do you have anything else that you want to add about this particular section?
No, I think we covered it. I think that if we, define, I guess, what future obligations are, and to Tom's point, to change the heading on the section, then I can't think of anything else.
Is there anything else in 907 that we have missed?
The chart I have has a comment from Nick. Let me just see. I flipped the page just a second. Yeah.
The comment was from the Hamel Hanley group about eliminating the need for.
I missed the page. Oh, there it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did this, was that with the subcommittee? Did they already talk about that?
What was it, Liam? Maybe you could just refresh us.
I can't remember.
The suggestion, the proposed change was to eliminate the 25% voter participation threshold in 907.1.3. And simply go to a sort of an up or down vote. It goes, it shouldn't require that threshold, which I think, again, I haven't heard any other discussion about other sections that have threshold, voter threshold requirements. So I'm not sure if there's any appetite to strike it from this portion or not.
Does anybody feel?
And I wasn't suggesting that. I just wanted to point out it was.
No, you're right. It's
in this.
the last comment we have to go through. Yep.
Yeah.
Does anybody want to take that up, or we're done with that? Okay,
I have a question on that one.
sure, Leanne.
If I'm reading this correctly, would that mean that we would need to hit at least 25% participation for every budget referendum as well in order for the budget to pass?
It's the other way around. If you don't hit 25, it passes automatically.
Okay.
I don't think it applies at all to the school budget validation vote.
It does not. It doesn't apply at all.
Just a bond.
Tony, just for historical context, have we ever had a vote fail for lack of voter turnout in your tenure here?
Great American Neighborhood, right?
Yes, just one, and that was the Great American. You're right, Annalee. Yep, just that one. That's the only one.
I might suggest, I wasn't here then, but that's interesting. That was an important issue for the town, presumably, and I think it does make some sense to make sure that there's a good representation from the electorate.
And I think in that, Tony, that yes outnumbered the no's, but they didn't reach the 25% threshold. That was a long time ago, but that
Correct. I think
there was a lot of conversation around that.
I think the tactic that the group used worked against them.
Yes,
They
definitely.
were urging people not to vote.
Definitely.
And so I think that worked against them. That's why it failed. Yeah.
Was it that long ago?
It was a long time ago, Mike.
Oh, man.
Another lifetime, Mike.
Yeah,
That must have been early 2000s, right?
that's
2002
right.
or 3?
Planning board days.
They all run together for me now. I don't know.
And so that was the last item that I'm aware of. Are there any other items that we're missing? I didn't go back over them and just verify, but I don't know of any others that we haven't picked up.
That you've covered this sheet, the long sheet.
So in that case, we have pretty much exhausted our first run through of the document. And we have identified issues that were held by the full committee. We've gone through them all. We have either adopted or not adopted amendments and red line language. In addition, each of the individual subcommittees has taken on a number of issues under each of the articles, and they have suggested red line changes to some of that language And that should be in Tody's hands, and she should be incorporating it into the final red line version. So I think at this point, we're now ready to go through the red line version. We don't have it yet, but I mean, I don't think there's anything else for us to cover that's in the charter that we haven't gotten to yet.
Tony, can you comment on where the red line version stands and how quickly that could be available to the committee?
It would be, when the next meeting is scheduled, I've been keeping current with all the changes that have been made over the meetings. So the only one that I haven't is just the last meeting, not this one, but the one prior to. And I'm going through, so it should be ready for the next meeting.
Okay, and Mike, do you think you'll be able to, with your subcommittee, pick up that additional language on 9071 for the next meeting 2 weeks from now?
I'd like to say yes right away, yeah. I'll get together with Mary and Karen and Tom and talk about the resources we may need. Ideally, we'll have enough resources where we can come up with something substantive in one meeting, Tom. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's entirely doable. If we can grab an hour sometime, I think we can work through it and have language for your consideration at the next meeting.
Okay, great.
And that would be May 13th. Somebody just, Tony, May 13th would be our next meeting. Is that correct?
2 weeks from tonight, so.
May 6th.
May
6th,
6th.
I was gonna say, I think it's earlier.
Thought it was that we were the second and fourth.
I thought so too, because there's 5 Thursdays.
Oh,
so
that's true.
You
That's
can't just
true.
jump 2 weeks. You have to go to the 2nd and 4th.
That's true.
You're right,
forgot about
Leanne.
that.
That
Yeah.
I had it written down on my calendar for the 13th. That's why I'm double checking.
Okay.
Mike,
Well, that gives you 3 weeks to get ready, Mike.
Mike, if you're able to work with Tom and the committee to get the language done, maybe you could just give it to Tody and she could incorporate it directly into the red line. And that way we just have the one document that's complete and we can work our way through instead of having to deal with that separately.
Okay. Maybe Tony, we'll just highlight it in some way, shape or form, because it would represent something other than everything else in that document that had not been voted on.
Sure. I can work with Tom.
Okay.
Well, as a committee, we would vote on it, I guess, because all the other things that came from the small subcommittees aren't voted on yet by the full committee. So
Oh, they're not. Oh, you're right. Okay. All right.
we could just vote on it just amongst our small committee and then,
Put it in.
and then it has to be voted by everyone anyway.
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Mary. Yeah.
Annalee?
Never mind.
Okay. So Tody, you'll pull this together and get it to us ahead of the May 13th meeting.
Yes, as soon as I get
Earlier is
the,
better.
yeah, as soon as I get the information from Mike's group, I'll get it out there.
And presumably the process, Richard, would be to start on Article 1 and work yourself cover to cover?
I think so. And because we'll have the entire document in front of us, it'll make it easier to look at it as a whole and each of the individual pieces. So I think the process, Nick ultimately probably, would agree with this. I think it's just to walk through it from page 1 to page 15 or whatever. But because there may be some relationships, it may require skipping back and forth to make sure things are consistent.
Sure.
Well, that sounds good to me, Mike. So our subcommittee, I'll just ask Mary and Karen and Tom, if you could maybe just start looking over the next, say, 4 or 5 days. Because I would prefer that if we can get this behind us in the next week or so and then give Tody enough time and instead of waiting, if we can sneak it in, that'd be good.
Thanks, Mike.
And the next meeting's the 13th, right? That was
Yes.
confirmed? Okay.
Much as I love talking to all of you, and you probably love talking to each other too, it's I don't see anything else for us to do this evening, so
I move we adjourn.
thanks, Annalise.
You're supposed to say, I'm going to give you back 45 minutes of your life.
I can only do that if you second the motion, Mike.
I second the motion.
I had one question before we adjourn.
Sure,
Can we set a target date to have the red line to review so we can be prepped to, for the next meetings, especially since we have an extra week?
It'll depend on whether, when Mike gets Tony the
Right.
document, but
Right,
once he
Right.
gets it to her, it'll take just, 10 minutes to put it in.
yeah.
Yeah.
So she'll get it to us as soon as she can.
I would think we can get it to you a week before.
I was gonna say a week
Yeah,
before.
a week before would be great. Thank you.
And just keep in mind, don't feel as though you need to read all of it cover to cover. This is going to be fairly slow slogging through, I suspect. So if you get through the first couple articles, you're good for a bit, I suspect.
Okay. Well, we've got the motion and seconded. Karen,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes.
Allison,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Annalee,
Yes.
and myself, yes. So I don't think, oh, did I miss anybody? No, okay, good.
No, just